And today's topic, as I already mentioned, is how to approach trading an emerging narrative. In this case, it's the Made in the USA tokens. We want to think about this from a trader's point of view where they're saying, hey, I'm hearing about something brand new. In this case, it's Made in USA tokens. What should I do? Should I just go out there and start buying these to be early? Should I be thinking more and learning about the narrative? Should I evaluate other aspects of it? That's what we're going to get into right now. So let's kick it off. But before we do that, well, I want to do something we haven't actually done too much of. We've always brought you guys up here, Benjamin as the whale hunter, Amit as the range sniper, really showing off some of the more skills that we see. But I really want to hear more from you guys, a little bit more of your background. We can give everyone a little bit more of your background. So Benjamin, I'll start with you. Can you just give a recap of kind of your background, what brought you here?
Hey, this is Benjamin here. In short, I've been designing and implementing automated trading systems for Forex and crypto since 2015. Some of those systems have been able to capacitate over 200 million in capital at its peak. And glad to be here.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. Amit, what about you?
My name is Amit, and I've been trading crypto successfully for the last 5 years. Before crypto, I was working as a risk manager in a credit and market risk platform, and where I used to manage risk for some of the big banking portfolios.
All right, fantastic. And for those who are wondering about me, I'm a former management consultant, worked at the Big Four in strategy and operations, worked at banks and payments before I got the crypto bug in 2017. Since then, I've been an evangelist and a convert looking at investing and trading. So that's a little bit more about us, but let's actually get into the question. So guys, you know, we talked offline a little bit about this. The USA tokens are coming out big. Obviously, we had the push of Trump's meme coins, but we're not actually talking about that today. We're talking about this new narrative that's come out, which is really more about are tokens and projects that are originating in the United States, are they going to be prioritized for legislation coming out for the US? And so I think a lot of people are picking up at that. So I saw that CoinGecko, I believe, actually created a list of tokens that were supposedly USA tokens. Solana was on there. I think Ripple XRP may be on there. And so it's really kind of a little difficult to say what exactly would meet that criteria. But I'm kind of curious, as you guys hear this narrative, and I know there'll be new ones that are going to be coming out later in the year. You know, we've already talked about AI agents. I'm sure there'll be other ones coming back to DeFi. You know, Amit, I want to start with you. How do you start to, when you hear about a new narrative, how do you start to think about, okay, is this something I need to pay attention to? Is it something to look at specifically from a trader's point of view?
Looking at the narratives, interestingly, I mean, being in the industry for 4 or 5 years, I mean, we have navigated through many narratives. I mean, there was a Luna narrative, there was an FTX narrative. So over the period of time, I've built a kind of a system to look at the narratives, which one I can get into straight and which one I need to take a step back and start filtering out the information. So I bring this back to the current situation, right? Now we have two set of narratives that are running simultaneously. One is basically driven by, like you said, Made in America. And the second narrative I've been looking at is from the Hyperliquid side. So when I approach these two narratives, I mean, I look at each narrative in a different way. Like not all trades are same, not all narratives are same either. So depends actually who's pushing. The way I filter out the narrative is, have I seen this narrative before? Are there any telltale signs of, I mean, how it has played out in the past? And then who's pushing that narrative? If it is a new set of crypto community that is basically pushing the narrative, then the point is basically, let's see where it plays out, how it plays out, get the details of it. But if it is pushed by somebody like President of the United States, then you have to pay attention. Then the question is different. I mean, you view that narrative from different perspective because they are not pushing a token. They are pushing an agenda. Agenda as in from how the regulations will look like, what regulations will play out, and who will be the beneficiary of those regulations.
You're saying you kind of categorize the narrative into different buckets, right? They're not all created equal. So you're putting a little bit more weight perhaps on the USA token one because the narrative is broader speaking. It's coming from the regulatory side of things.
The reason why a narrative is always advantageous, why people like narratives, is that if you take the whole crypto ecosystem, the number of tokens is always ever increasing, right? Like in the last cycle, in the first cycle, we had some 800 tokens. In the second cycle, we had some 15,000 tokens. And now thanks to Solana and, it's SVM tokens, now it's like millions. And nobody has an idea how many tokens have been deployed, how much is liquidity and what, right? Now in such an array of, list, how are you going to be able to justify and say the token you are looking at makes sense? Or the baskets you have, the portfolio you have makes sense, right? And typically you have to go from investor perspective as well. How do you make it easier for the investor to decide and say, okay, I'm going to put in like 5% of my portfolio into this particular idea. So it's more about an idea. Now, AI agents is one idea, DeFi is one idea, right? And that idea takes shape with multiple sub-narratives as well. The Made in USA model, the way I look at it, is a way for telling the US users in future that they should basically, use those tokens as a benchmark, to make it easy for you. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to kindle your patriotism and tell you these are the set of tokens that you have to look at because these are all USA made. Now, why wouldn't you basically allocate into it? So there is a huge advantage when it comes to allocating the patriotism agenda on one side, and that definitely will attract a lot of capital. So you have to see whether the specific narrative idea or this basket will attract capital. As a layman, if you're able to sense that, well, I think my friends who are across the table or in the corner of my street or my driver would basically be excited to hear about something made in USA and allocate into it, then that is the narrative that's going to gain a lot of volume, right? So you have to always think from very simple perspective and then complicate it, in my opinion.
Complicated. Okay. So you first have this sort of categorization on it that you're talking about, that not all narratives are equal, right? Some are going to be much more substantial in terms of what they can do. And I want to get back to that in a little bit and hear, Amit, your thoughts on sort of the distinction between what we're seeing from Made in USA tokens versus like a Hyperliquid. Then Benjamin, you're talking about there's always an idea with any of these sort of thrusts that you're going to see they're going to attract capital. So we need to have a narrative to begin with. That's going to be part of the storytelling. And the simpler the story, the easier it is to see it attracting capital.
Yeah. So specifically talking about Made in USA tokens, right? If you look at the list, the list itself, it's not new tokens. All the tokens that are there, they are established over the years. So narrative fits very well. Then it's basically you're not chasing something new that has come in. So what you're trying to do here is, the way I started looking at this, once the Made in USA narrative started, specifically, let me share my screen. The way I'm trying to filter out the noise here, right? So most of our tokens, this is basically Made in USA category. That is where they go.
Mm-hmm. This is from CoinGecko, right?
Yeah, that's from CoinGecko within that. So I started filtering out, because once you have the list, right, then the first point is how you filter out the noise. So the way I filter out the noise is, again, by volume. What is the volume on a token? If the volume is 10 million, there is no point you can deploy big capital there, because the open interest would be so high, it won't let you do any trade of size. So there is no point spending any time there. So then I basically start filtering out, saying, let's say there is a daily volume of 100 million. That's a starting point. That filters out quite a lot of tokens. So that list goes down. Then the next I apply as a filter is, what is the market cap? That might be 500 million. So you apply that. That basically filters out loads of token for you. And then you can start saying, from that perspective, which tokens you can trade. And most of the tokens that come out in the list, like you can say XRP, Solana, Cardano, Chainlink, and these are all established tokens. So then it becomes easier. Now, rather than looking at 500 tokens, you are looking at only a handful of 20, 30 tokens. And then from that point onwards, it's much easier. Now it's not a new basket of tokens. It's the same tokens, but narrative is behind them. Then you start looking at how it is basically what the chart looks like. Is there a trade? So that's how I start to filter down, basically based on the narrative. First point of identification is the volume, and then looking at what the market cap is, so that you're not jumping on something that is here today, gone tomorrow.
Well, yeah, and I want to actually double click on that point, because here you have, specific to this narrative, we have established tokens that are fitting into this broader narrative. And we all know, if you follow the playbook of Trump, he's a showman, right? And so he's going to be talking about this anytime, if this is the direction that they go, he's going to be talking about these tokens. He has no idea how they work or what they do. What about instances where the narrative is emerging and the tokens aren't as established, right? So maybe it's a mixed bag, right? So you've got DeFi, right? Where we have seen some newer protocols, like Athena came out just over a year ago, versus Aave, which has been here for 5 years. And there's hope. We talk about it during the Flow Report every time with Ben Lilly. This idea that there could be a DeFi emergence that comes back as regulatory guidelines start to solidify and give new breadth to that. How do you go about thinking about, okay, here let's assume we see good amounts of TVL, we see good volume. They hit all those criteria. Is there something you're looking for to kind of say, okay, I want to look through established versus new ones from a trader perspective?
Specifically, when you start looking at the new tokens that is coming out, right? The first thing you have to be prepared is for the volatility. I mean, not 5%, 10%. You have to be prepared for 50% to 60% volatility. And that's the mindset you go in with. First, you see, okay, I assume this is a new token. There is a good narrative behind it. There is a good team behind it. There is a volume behind it. There is a lot of trading activity and there is a mind share. Now I'm prepared to play the swings of, let's say, not around 30, 40%. And then you start analyzing from that perspective. Okay, now here is a chart that is not on a daily basis going just 1%, 2%. It's a new narrative. You expect a volume to be there. You expect a volatility to be there because there is a narrative behind it. And that's where you can start thinking about, okay, how I'm going to create this. So that's more on the token perspective.
Benjamin, what about you? I mean, we talked about you look at a narrative, you're able to kind of qualitatively look at it and say, okay, how simplistic, how good can it be at getting capital into it? Then you make a determination. Then are you then next looking at tokens and kind of going through the same process as Ahmed? Do you have a different approach?
Similar process, but I have two sides of the story to that coin. There's one perspective where you want to basically allocate only to the large caps or the established coins, because you think those will do well and have shown performance. The second angle I have is that, well, if you want outsized gains, you have to go to the tokens which are below that market cap and volume. Why? Because the volatility on the tokens which have high volume, that would already be much lower and probably already have a very good allocation in most of the portfolios of global traders. But some of these tokens which are, let's say, below 500 million market cap and doing less than 100 million on spot volume, these tokens might see a sudden flush in volume coming in, because everybody will be like, well, there's like 50 tokens. Now I want to figure out, I don't know which ones to go in with. So let me put in money everywhere. Let me put in like some randomize everything and put it in. And some people would be like, in this, I like the AI narrative. So let me put into the AI narrative inside the Made in USA token. So there's always sub-narratives in a narrative, right? And most of these people are not going to your DEX screener or an exchange in Binance and going and checking if there is spot volume or per volume. Sometimes some people just like the logo, some people just like the names. You have to think of them as a very average IQ investor who are making emotional allocations because of the narrative. So if that is the case, where would they be going to basically see if they can make outsized gains? It's going to be the low caps in your list or the mid caps in your list, which is why we saw XLM, which is Stellar, run like crazy. Even though it's a mid to large cap, it is highly unallocated because Stellar hasn't been doing well for years as a blockchain. But as a token, it was also unallocated. So, look what happened. When even like a few millions walked into it, price just rallied up nonstop, right? So that's what happens with mid-cap to low-cap tokens in a narrative. So you have to always look at how you want to define your portfolio, right? So inside the Made in USA situation, what do you like? What do you trust? Are you someone who trusts RWA models better? Are you someone who says like banking model better, which is XRP, right? Or you come in and say, okay, I think all AI tokens will do well in this. Now you have to allocate your portfolio in that manner. Because if President Trump succeeds with the zero tax policy for the Made in USA tokens, it is possible you will see way more allocations come into it, because I don't know of many assets in the United States which have zero taxes. I do not know myself. Maybe there are better accountants over here who can, match that. But I don't know of any asset which has zero taxes.
There isn't one.
Yeah. So, and if you tell me that, one of those assets, even if they existed, it's unlimited and it's seen flows, and irrespective of whether you like the token or not, with these list of assets, these assets basically have a limited supply. They're not unlimited supply. They all went with the same Bitcoin narrative on creating limited supply economics. Mm-hmm. So you got to be very cautious if like 10 billion walks into this pot. Yeah. So having no allocation to this is also a bad idea, to be honest. And keep in mind, this is not just about US traders. It's also going to be about everyone who basically anticipates what US traders will do. So the anticipation is what matters as well.
Yeah, the market FOMOing into this idea of what it can be. Okay, so you have a way in which you can filter down the tokens. I think a perspective from Amit being more looking at the liquidity, seeing something you could trade, I think within your existing system, Amit, of looking at sort of weekly, daily, monthly closes perhaps, and we can get to that in a minute. And then you've got this idea of like not skipping on sort of the mid caps, which could see a flush because there's of the under allocation. Which I think is definitely something that traders should be aware of and think about sizing appropriately. There's also the risk, I would imagine, that some of those don't all sort of get a wave, right? They don't all participate equally in sort of the narrative. So I think that's good kind of construction for a model of how people can think through this. Where do you go from there? Because one thought is, okay, so now you start to see the narrative coming. You qualified it. You said, hey, I think this is something that's got some legs. In this case, USA token, I think it definitely has legs for a period of time until we see something that says it doesn't, right? And so now you can start to position based on looking at traditional metrics, the stuff that you guys share every week with Panda, with starting to look at volume, starting to see, are we seeing something in the order book flows or the order flow? What about sort of moving this on and thinking, okay, do you start to see signs that it's going away? Do you worry about that at this stage as you're qualifying it and starting to trade it? Does it all come out in the data that you're doing every week? How do you think about that?
Well, honestly, we're always worried that the narrative is going to go away because this market has increasingly become something about, I've split it into 3 periods, to be honest. There's a 30-day cycle, there's a 60-day cycle, there's a 90-day cycle. So how I look at it, and today morning I was talking about this to one of the prime brokerage representatives who we work with very closely on how a narrative is basically becoming like a 30-day cycle. And then you have a bit of a sideways on that for another 30 days, which is your 60-day cycle. And then you basically have a downtrend on that narrative for another 30 days, totally completing a 90-day cycle. Now, it feels like, this is totally unbacked information. This still feels like there is money rotation coming into the market suddenly only for a 30-day purpose, and it is not able to sustain itself beyond that point. So, on a layman terms, it's like someone is lending money for 30 days to go and gamble in the market, and money rotates, and in 30 days it comes back into the treasury and sits, right? So if you are going into a shortening cycle type of a situation when it comes to narratives, I don't think the hodler model for narratives has worked out that well for a lot of people, whether it was meme coins or AA agents. Look at AAXBT, look at AA16Z, everything is back to its pre-November levels. So there's really not much retention. It's all some of my friends say it's attention economy. It's short term. So if you're going in, you have to go in because, well, this is a narrative that's hot now. I'm going in now, but I'm wary of it. I know I will get out. Are you a trader or an investor at this point? Are you looking to hold it for longer term? Then probably be ready for all the volatility and downside. You will not be able to minimize your drawdown in that case. But long term, thanks to the printer that we have in the country, it will still end up doing well as long as the bull market continues. So that's all you can bet on. But if you want a better guaranteed asset to work on, just buy Bitcoin. Forget everything else, right?
I've never heard that from your mouth.
Yeah, if you just want guaranteed asset, just buy Bitcoin, find a staking model and be happy about it. But obviously people are not going to be happy about it. If you are going to say that, okay, no, I want something better, then be prepared for volatility and drawdown because the time period is going to be short.
Amit, I mean, we're talking about fruit flies at this point with 30, 60, 90. Do you see it the same way? Are you looking more at the time cycles when you're thinking about a narrative, any narrative, I mean, USA or, the examples you just gave? Are you looking at it more from a data-centric perspective where maybe you're seeing liquidity starting to go down or volumes go down? How do you evaluate the strength of a narrative when it's starting to unwind?
See, from my perspective, I jump on a narrative from the entry side of things, because once you decide on which tokens you're going to trade, then it becomes kind of run-of-the-mill work. Then the same ranges come in play, same order book setup comes in play, and then you start measuring the liquidity. So it's most of the times it shows up on the chart. So when it is running out of steam, you will start seeing those wicks to the upside, liquidity grabs to the upside, and there will be no support on the order book. And then you can see from that perspective, the order book, which way it is getting thickened, where the trade frequency is, where the volume is coming from, and what time zone it is coming from. And those things play a kind of part on decision making, saying, okay, I knew this is how far it will run. Now it is running out of steam. I don't want to trade this anymore. But most of the cases, right, it happens by the time this happens, like Benjamin was saying, there is another narrative that plays out. So basically, we start to connect the dots here, saying, okay, these are the tokens that are running now, get into the narrative, and then you see the exit there. As in terms of, as you said, volatility is not there. It just dries up suddenly. The volume is not there. And then all of a sudden you start seeing the VIX to the upside. Then you see some other tokens starting to move. So you see there is a price money that are trying to rotate.
So there you have more from a technical perspective. I mean, the data is really telling you that this is starting to get dried up. I think I read something yesterday. They said, no matter what it is, the finance system will bleed it dry, right? No matter what the narratives. So you can start to see when it's bleeding dry. All right. Well, I think you guys have given a pretty good framework for how to think through any kind of narrative, from a qualification to applying it specific to this USA token narrative. Ahmed, start with you, and then I'll come to Benjamin. How are you playing this? You talked about already, you showed using CoinGecko as sort of a way to start to filter that down to tokens that you can use within your system. Are you starting to look at this more? Are you going to be studying any of the information that's coming out in terms of the narrative kind of evolving as more regulation stuff comes out from the White House and Congress? Or are you just going to focus on those tokens, look to trade them? How are you thinking about that?
I'm more interested in listening from SEC rather than White House. So funnily enough, we haven't heard anything from them so far. So that will be a basic. I mean, there was a lot of discussions going on why Fed is not kind of cutting the rates, or basically it's a hedge against what the tariff is going to play out. So yeah, I'm waiting and watching how this kind of a tussle plays out between the White House and the Feds, and then what SEC comes out with.
No need to rush in. Benjamin, what about you? Are you starting to take positions, or are you sort of on a wait and see as well?
I think I'm going to wait. I'm not in a rush, to be honest. I'm seeing some signs I'm not so happy about. And I think there is a bit of selling skew across other hedge fund desks that we collaborate with as well. And there is a decrease in credit line requests and everything across the board in prime brokerages. So I see the demand going down a bit. And this necessarily doesn't have to do with what is happening on DeepSeek, NASDAQ, or President Trump. It's also about the Chinese New Year that's coming up. You have to keep in mind that the entire Asia basically takes a break. They go light on it. They go light on the portfolio allocation. So I don't think we'll see something crazy happen. If we see a run, we see a run. But I think, there's going to be a bit of a pause.
So one thing I would say and take away from what you just shared is that always put the narrative within the context of the market, right? You could have something that's absolutely paradigm shifting, that's amazing, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to run tomorrow. If there's other factors like liquidity starting to become a little bit harder to source, credit is starting to become a little harder to source, et cetera, demand is kind of going down, which is one of the reasons we always try and come back to the flow report that we cover with Ben Lilly later on in the show to sort of see, are we seeing some of those signals early on? I would say for anybody, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat. Let us know if you're trading narratives, other ways in which you validate narratives from a trader point of view. And if you've got more questions for these guys, definitely leave it in the chat. But I think with that, we can wrap it up and move in to see what kind of trades we have this week. Now, before you start trading a narrative, you want to consider your account size, because if you're over or under $10,000, it will have a huge impact on your profitability. Check out Benjamin and Ahmed's thoughts on how to trade accounts from 1,000 all the way up to $1 million.